Alexander left Egypt in April 331 BCE, never to set foot there again. His visit had lasted only around 4 months. Yet, within that brief period, he had not only added Egypt to his expanding empire and been declared a living god, but he had also laid the groundwork for effective governance in the Nile Valley, anticipating both his own legacy and the future of his realm. Understanding that a military regime would not bring stability or prosperity to Egypt, Alexander established a clear division of authority. He left military control in Macedonian hands while assigning civil administration to 2 governors, one Egyptian and one Persian. Though deeply proud of his Greek heritage, Alexander envisioned a multicultural empire, one where individuals of all ethnic backgrounds could rise based on merit. Egypt may have come under Macedonian control, but local elites like Ptolemaic could still gain recognition and power, secure in the belief that they were favored by their ruler and honored in their home regions. Alexander also made deliberate efforts to show respect for Egyptian customs and religion. His public reverence for the Apis bull was meant to portray him not as a conqueror, but as a liberator and a ruler who honored ancient traditions. Reflecting this spirit, Ptolemaic posted a decree at the animal necropolis in Saqqara, forbidding soldiers from entering sacred areas. That document, preserved on papyrus, remains one of the oldest surviving Greek texts and stands as a testament to Alexander's inclusive policies. However, not all in Alexander's entourage shared his progressive ideals or concern for good governance. Soon after his departure, his carefully planned system began to unravel due to competing ambitions among his subordinates. The Egyptian governor stepped down, leaving the Persian official solely in charge of civil matters. Eventually, even he was sidelined as Cleomenes of Naucratis, a Greek commander responsible for eastern Egypt and its finances, was elevated to satrap, gaining broad authority. Despite Alexander's best intentions, Egypt was sliding back into authoritarian rule. When Alexander died unexpectedly on June 10, 323 BCE, the fate of Egypt was sealed. As his top generals fought over the division of his vast empire, one of them managed to secure control over Egypt. Having accompanied Alexander on his visit to the Oracle of Ammonius, Ptolemy may have claimed a personal connection to the province. He also understood its strategic value. Wealthy, defensible, and capable of becoming a powerful kingdom once again. Wasting no time, Ptolemy moved into Egypt, removed the unpopular Cleomenes, and began to consolidate his rule. Yet assuming control of the 2 lands came with significant challenges. Though he held political and economic power, Ptolemy lacked the spiritual legitimacy that Alexander had enjoyed as a pharaoh. With Alexander gone, Egyptians might resist another Macedonian ruler. Ptolemy recognized that Alexander's symbolic approval would be crucial for his own acceptance. Although Alexander had wished to be buried at the Temple of Ammonius in Siwa, the Macedonian regent, Perdiccas, had chosen instead to entomb him at Aegina with the Macedonian royal line for political purposes. Everyone, it seemed, sought possession of Alexander's body, viewing it as a source of legitimacy. Drawing upon his battlefield experience from the Near East, Ptolemy devised a bold and strategic plan to seize Alexander the Great's body right under the watch of Perdiccas. As the funeral procession journeyed from Babylon en route to the Hellespont, Ptolemy intercepted it in Syria, redirecting it to Egypt. Once Alexander's remains were secured on Egyptian soil, Ptolemy revealed his true motives. Rather than fulfilling the late conqueror's wish to be buried at Siwa, he instead laid the body to rest in Memphis, the historic seat of the pharaohs. By doing so, he cloaked himself in Alexander's legacy, making it nearly impossible to challenge his authority. Perdiccas was outraged by the maneuver, and it quickly escalated into open conflict between Egypt and Macedon. The first of many bitter struggles among Alexander's successors, a series of wars that would persist for 35 years. Meanwhile, the traditional Greek tendency toward ruthless, familial rivalries soon surfaced. Within a dozen years of Alexander's death, nearly all of his remaining relatives had been eliminated. His half-brother and designated heir, Philip III, was killed at the urging of Alexander's mother, Olympias. Later, Alexander's own son, born after his death, was murdered by his guardian. In Egypt, where maintaining appearances often took precedence over harsh truths, official records continued to count years as if the young Alexander IV were still alive and ruling. This fiction served as a political smokescreen, intended to give the illusion of loyalty while Ptolemy quietly pursued his own ambitions. A year before officially taking power, Ptolemy had relocated his residence to Alexandria, Alexander's coastal city. Once the new capital was complete, he acted decisively. On January 12, 304 BCE, he declared himself king. Among his first acts was to transfer Alexander's body to Alexandria, where it was placed in a grand new tomb within a glass-sided coffin. There, Alexander would rest forever, not merely as a military icon, but as the spiritual founder of a new city and dynasty. The Ptolemaic era had begun. The following 80 years, led by the first three Ptolemies, marked a golden age for Egypt. Though now a monarch, Ptolemy first retained his military prowess and used the prolonged wars of the successors to expand Egypt's influence across the eastern Mediterranean. In 313 BCE, he gained control of Cyprus, followed by key holdings in Anatolia and the Aegean. These supplemented Cyrenaica, which he had annexed just a year after Alexander's passing. In the early 280s, Ptolemy secured leadership over the Island League, affirming his dominance in the Cyclades. He further strengthened his position by forging alliances through marriages with prominent Macedonian families. When he died in the winter of 283 to 282 BCE at the age of 84, Ptolemy I had successfully built a protective buffer around Egypt, one that would endure for more than 250 years. The power struggle among Alexander's generals ultimately led to a tripartite division of his empire. To the northwest, Macedon retained its independence as his homeland. In the south, Egypt, along with Cyrenaica and Cyprus, came under the control of the Ptolemaic dynasty. The vast central region fell to another of Alexander's lieutenants, Seleucus, who established the Seleucid Empire, a formidable rival to the Ptolemies. Tensions over territorial claims between these three Hellenistic powers persisted, especially during the reigns of Ptolemy II and III, culminating in the Syrian wars between Egypt and the Seleucid kingdom. These recurring wars offered Egypt a chance to push its boundaries further. Ptolemy II extended Egyptian influence into southern and western Anatolia, while Ptolemy III secured control of the Ionian coast, the Hellespont, and parts of southern Thrace. For the Ptolemies, expanding their territory was a strategic tool rather than a final objective. Across their dominions, trade stood at the core of state policy. Much like later global empires, Ptolemaic Egypt amassed extraordinary wealth through thriving commerce, supported by its vast natural resources. Early in his reign, Ptolemy II launched a military campaign against the Nubian kingdom of Meroe, successfully claiming control over Lower Nubia, a region rich in gold. To emphasize the conquest, he established a gold processing settlement in the Wadi Alaki, naming it Berenike Pankrysos in tribute to his formidable mother. This acquisition also gave Egypt access to African elephants, which were crucial for challenging the powerful Indian elephants deployed by the Seleucid forces. In another bold move, Ptolemy II ordered the ancient canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea to be cleared and reopened for navigation. Red Sea ports became gateways for maritime trade with India, while Nile vessels ventured into sub-Saharan Africa. Overland, caravans of camels crossed the Sahara to the west and extended trade eastward to Arabia. Under the Ptolemies, Egypt regained its position as a central hub in a global trading network. When it came to displaying their immense wealth and far-reaching connections, the Ptolemies spared no expense. During the winter of 275 to 274 BCE, Egypt hosted one of the most lavish spectacles the ancient world had ever seen. Inside a massive tent within the royal fortress, Ptolemy II and 130 hand-picked guests looked on as an extravagant ceremonial parade passed before them. The procession began with statues of the dynasty's divine patrons, Dionysus, Zeus, Alexander, Ptolemy I, and his queen Berenike. Next came tribute from distant lands, 24 wagons carrying elephants, along with antelopes, ostriches, wild asses, leopards, a giraffe, a rhinoceros, and countless camels. Nubians paraded bearing offerings, followed by vibrantly dressed Indian women, herds of cattle, and packs of dogs, all categorized simply as fauna by Ptolemy. The grand finale featured a military display of 80,000 Ptolemaic soldiers, reinforcing the connection between wealth and power. Unlike the pharaohs of old who had merely depicted tribute scenes on stone walls, the Ptolemies enacted them live. Perhaps the most striking departure from pharaonic tradition was the setting of this grandeur. Not in Thebes or Memphis, but in Alexandria, the gleaming capital of the Ptolemaic realm. Since its founding on April 7th, 331 BCE, Alexandria had risen to become the foremost commercial hub of the Mediterranean. Chosen personally by Alexander the Great, the city's location proved ideal, just under 20 miles from a major Nile outlet, but untouched by seasonal flooding. Its natural twin harbors, separated by a causeway, offered deep anchorage perfect for maritime trade. Along the bustling waterfront stood docks, warehouses, shipyards, and a vast trading center. Nearby were a theater and a temple dedicated to Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea. Inland, the city was designed with Hellenistic precision, laid out in a grid with two broad avenues, each 100 feet wide, intersecting at right angles. These streets framed the city's main public areas, including the central marketplace and important temples. As the heart of administration and royal life, palaces and sacred enclosures occupied between a quarter and a third of the urban landscape. The city boasted a royal tomb, towering statues, court buildings, and a grand gymnasium with colonnades, structures that blended Egyptian and Greek artistry, crafted from gleaming marble and polished granite. Alexandria was a meeting point of civilizations, a city where Hellenistic elegance and Egyptian tradition stood side by side. Yet despite its magnificence, some native Egyptians derided it as nothing more than a construction site. No institution embodied the Ptolemies' grand vision for Alexandria more profoundly than the Great Library. From the very beginning, Ptolemy I was determined to rival Athens and establish his new capital as the foremost center of learning in the Greek world. To achieve this, he founded a scholarly institution within the palace district, overseen by a priest devoted to the Muses. This institution, known as the Museum, quickly grew into a vibrant hub of research and education. The Ptolemies actively recruited the brightest minds from across the Hellenic world, enticing them with the promise of academic freedom and secure, state-funded salaries. The museum's facilities were designed to foster intellectual activity. Covered walkways offered quiet spaces for study and reflection, while a large banquet hall provided a venue for scholars to gather and exchange ideas. At its heart stood the library, no ordinary archive, but the most expansive collection of literature in the ancient world. The Ptolemies amassed books from every major literary center, sometimes through dubious means. So eager was Ptolemy III to obtain rare manuscripts that he engaged in calculated deception. He arranged to borrow original works from Athenian libraries, offering a generous deposit of 15 silver talents. Once the text arrived in Alexandria, he informed Athens that they could keep the money. He was keeping the books. At its peak, the Great Library housed around 500,000 papyrus scrolls, encompassing the full range of human knowledge. Its collection was matched by the brilliance of the minds it attracted. Though a few Egyptians were among its scholars, most hailed from across the Greek-speaking world. Euclid, drawn from Athens' Platonic school, compiled a unified framework for all known Greek mathematics. The legendary engineer Archimedes developed his water-lifting screw while in Egypt, and Aristarchus of Samos proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system, placing the sun at its center. In 245 BCE, Eratosthenes, a renowned geographer and astronomer, was appointed director of the library. During his time in Alexandria, he calculated the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy by comparing the lengths of shadows in Aswan and Alexandria at the same time of day. Among his peers were physicians grounded in the Hippocratic tradition, who advanced the understanding of the body's nervous, digestive, and circulatory systems. Meanwhile, the court poet Callimachus meticulously organized the contents of the library, producing a detailed catalog that would help preserve Greek scholarship for future generations. Amid such intellectual brilliance, one monumental structure came to symbolize Alexandria's greatness in both a practical and symbolic sense: the Pharos Lighthouse. Rising from a rocky island connected to the mainland by a long causeway, the Pharos towered above the harbor. Initiated by Ptolemy I and completed by his successor in 280 BCE, the lighthouse was an engineering marvel. Built from massive stone blocks, each weighing roughly 75 tons, the structure consisted of 3 tiers: first square, then octagonal, and finally cylindrical. At its summit stood a colossal statue of Zeus, and beneath it, a brilliant beacon burned day and night. Its light, reflected and intensified by mirrors, could be seen from far out at sea, guiding ships into Alexandria. The Pharos served both as a vital navigation aid and a bold statement of Ptolemaic ambition. It was a shining beacon of Greek ingenuity and a powerful emblem of their dominance in Egypt. While the maritime world surrounding Alexandria was thoroughly Greek in character, the Nile Delta and the river valley presented a stark contrast. Under Ptolemaic rule, only 3 cities in Egypt were granted the status of autonomous Greek-style polis: Alexandria itself, Naucratis, an ancient trading hub, and the newly established city of Ptolemy in Upper Egypt, founded by Ptolemy I near Abydos to counterbalance the traditional influence of Thebes. Within these cities, citizens benefited from preferential tax treatment and the right to elect their own local magistrates. Thousands of immigrants from across the Greek world were drawn to Egypt, viewing it as a land rich with opportunity in commerce and finance. Naturally, they gravitated toward these existing centers of Greek life. As a result, Alexandria, Naucratis, and Ptolemy quickly evolved into cosmopolitan cities, where Sicilians, Illyrians, Thracians, Ionians, and Carians lived side by side. Meanwhile, vast portions of rural Egypt, where native Egyptians remained the majority, experienced little change from this influx and largely retained their traditional character. This divide formed a deep cultural and social fault line in Ptolemaic society. Though the Pharos lighthouse symbolized opportunity, it was no symbol of equality. A privileged Greek elite of officials, merchants, and soldiers dominated political and economic life, while the Egyptian peasantry continued to farm the land, much as they always had. The Ptolemies readily embraced the autocratic style of rule perfected by the ancient pharaohs, but placed power in the hands of a small circle of Greek-speaking loyalists. The traditional Egyptian vizier, once the top administrator of the land, was replaced by a new official, the dioiketes. Subordinate administrators with equally foreign-sounding titles managed various branches of government, from the hypomnematographus, the chief secretary based in Alexandria, to the strategos, the provincial governor tasked with overseeing local affairs and maintaining royal control over the Egyptian population. This elite class had their gymnasia, exclusive centers of Greek male culture and education. They spoke, wrote, and thought in Greek, and many of them still considered themselves Greek even after generations of living in Egypt. They also operated under a separate legal code, brought from their homeland. While Greeks were judged under their own system, native Egyptians continued to have their cases heard by traditional pharaonic courts. The result was a society governed by 2 parallel systems of law, one for those in power and another for the rest. In rural areas, particularly in regions like the Fayum, where large numbers of Greek military settlers were stationed, the local population had little choice but to adapt to the foreign presence. It became common for lower-ranking bureaucrats to adopt dual identities, using Greek names in their official capacities while retaining their Egyptian names in private life. In typical villages such as Kirkiasiris, Greek religious practices existed alongside native traditions. Shrines to Zeus and the divine twins Castor and Pollux stood beside sanctuaries dedicated to ancient Egyptian deities like Isis, Thoth, Badet, and Ammonius. Even in Memphis, a historically diverse city with a bustling port, the cultural divide persisted, with each ethnic community residing in its own distinct quarter. The challenge facing the Ptolemies was how to forge unity in a kingdom composed of diverse peoples, languages, and traditions, how to avoid the deepening of cultural and ethnic divisions. As had often been the case in Egypt's long history, the answer lay in religion. Animal cults, a long-established feature of traditional Egyptian belief, offered a potential bridge. Ptolemy I took great care to honor these sacred traditions, especially the veneration of the Apis bull in Memphis, one of the most ancient and revered cults tied to the concept of divine kingship since Egypt's earliest dynasties. To complement the existing sanctuary at Saqqara, Ptolemy first constructed a second complex in Alexandria, this one dedicated to the god Osiris Apis, better known in the Greek world as Serapis. Pilgrims from across the Hellenistic world journeyed to visit the two great serapeums. However, the native Egyptians remained largely unmoved. To them, Serapis was clearly not one of their gods. In time, the Ptolemaic state ceased its financial support for the cult, recognizing its failure to win over the local population. A more effective strategy was the Ptolemaic attempt to blend Hellenistic and Egyptian ideas of kingship into a unified royal cult. Alexander's life and veneration after death had demonstrated the persuasive power of the Greek model. Meanwhile, the Egyptian notion of divine kingship remained a potent symbol. By merging these two traditions, the Ptolemies sought to create a ruler cult that would resonate with both Greeks and Egyptians. Initially, the Hellenistic concept of the basileus, or king, dominated. Ptolemy I actively promoted the cult of Alexander, aligning himself with it to legitimize his rule. He elevated Alexander to divine status as the new state god and positioned the priest of Alexander as the most powerful religious figure in the kingdom. Ptolemy himself showed no reluctance in pursuing divinity. On the island of Rhodes, he accepted worship during his lifetime. After his death, he was officially deified in Egypt, and a festival in his honor was held every 4 years in Alexandria, complete with parades, sacrifices, feasts, and athletic games. Ptolemy II took this practice even further. He established divine cults for various members of his family, including his lovers. His famous procession of 275 to 274 BCE celebrated the military and material power that underpinned his kingship, yet he also took steps to reinforce his identity as a legitimate Egyptian ruler. Early in his reign, he toured many of Egypt's most sacred temples, especially those devoted to traditional animal cults, to fulfill his obligations as a pharaoh. Statues of himself and his relatives were placed in the Serapeum at Saqqara, displayed alongside representations of the Apis bull and other native deities. Like the pharaohs before him, Ptolemy II commissioned grand temple complexes as a sign of devotion. One of the most significant projects was the Temple of Isis at Philae, located near the first cataract of Nile. Construction and restoration work also took place at key religious sites such as Ipit Sut, Jebtu, known to the Greeks as Coptos, Unit, Tintiris, Saqqara, and Perhebit, Izium, in the Delta. These native temples were strongholds of Egyptian tradition, resolutely independent institutions that actively resisted foreign influences to preserve the customs of pharaonic religion. By taking on the role of royal benefactor in the traditional way, Ptolemy II hoped to win the support of the native populace and ease their resistance to foreign rule. Temples were not only religious centers, but also major landholders and economic hubs. Their wealth made them essential to the state's financial strategy. To access these valuable resources, Ptolemy installed royal agents within temple estates, trusted officials responsible for safeguarding the crown's economic interests. Egypt's legendary prosperity had always relied on its fertile lands and agricultural abundance. From the very beginning, The Ptolemies were intent on fully harnessing the potential of their newly acquired realm. The dynasty's founder established the city of Ptolemy in a region known for its productive farmland. He also launched a bold initiative in the Fayum, transforming vast stretches of desert into arable fields through irrigation. This ambitious effort resulted in a threefold increase in cultivable land across the region. Under Ptolemy II, an extraordinary feat of engineering was accomplished with the creation of an artificial lake in southern Fayum, capable of holding 360 million cubic yards of water. This reservoir enabled irrigation for approximately 60 square miles of farmland. Since these lands had been reclaimed from unclaimed desert, they were free from any traditional ownership rights, and their agricultural output flowed directly into the royal treasury. Throughout the countryside, the government's most basic officials focused their efforts almost exclusively on agricultural matters. Their primary duty was to assess how much land the state could lease to tenant farmers and estimate the income it would generate. Twice a year, these scribes were summoned to the provincial capital to meet with the Greek-appointed governor in the records office. The first meeting in February prepared for the annual survey of crops and land use, and the second, held a month later, reviewed the results of that survey. Later, in early summer, scribes from across the land gathered in Alexandria to report to the dioiketes, the top financial officer. This administrative process underscored a consistent truth. Regardless of who ruled, the economic interests of the state remained paramount. Like many colonial regimes before and after, the Ptolemaic administration focused on extracting maximum profit from the land, with little regard for the consequences. Lower Egypt was burdened with a land tax, while Upper Egypt was subject to a tax on its harvest. Fees for government positions were steep, and even minor officials like village scribes were required to pay commissions upon appointment or renewal. They also had to lease crown land at inflated annual rates as a condition of their post. Gradually, the state introduced a new economic order, one that prioritized wheat cultivation, relied on intermediaries for tax collection, and employed every possible strategy to increase revenue. These measures transformed Egypt into the richest and most powerful of all Hellenistic kingdoms. Yet this wealth came at a cost. The relentless pressure to extract resources created social strain and unrest. Though long subordinate in their own land, Egypt's native population would not remain silent and passive forever. While the Ptolemies sought to portray themselves as divinely sanctioned and benevolent rulers, this self-image was far from universally accepted. Just 2 generations into Greek control of Egypt, discontent among the local population began to boil over in response to the harsh economic policies imposed by their foreign overlords. In 245 BCE, during the Third Syrian War, Ptolemy III was forced to abandon his military campaign to suppress a native uprising. Although this particular revolt was brief and relatively minor, it foreshadowed the deeper unrest that lay ahead. For the next 30 years, resentment simmered beneath the surface, kept in check only by the heavy-handed mechanisms of Ptolemaic repression. Ironically, it was a celebrated military triumph that pushed this unrest to a breaking point. In 217 BCE, after 2 years of hostilities in the Fourth Syrian War, the armies of Ptolemaic Egypt and the Seleucid kingdom clashed near the town of Raphia. To sustain the war effort, Ptolemy IV raised taxes even further, placing additional strain on an already burdened population. In a marked departure from earlier royal disdain for native troops, he also enlisted a large number of Egyptian soldiers, though they were equipped and trained in the Macedonian fashion. On the eve of battle, Ptolemy IV attempted to assume the role of a traditional pharaoh, delivering a speech to his forces. But the illusion fell flat. His words had to be translated from Greek into Egyptian, revealing the disconnect between ruler and people. Despite this, the Ptolemaic army narrowly won the Battle of Raphia. The king celebrated the victory by immortalizing his image on temple walls, presenting himself as a heroic conqueror and ruler of Syria. Yet this would be the last time a Ptolemaic monarch displayed such assertiveness. The 20,000 Egyptian troops now experienced and emboldened by battle, soon mutinied. Their revolt ignited widespread rebellion throughout the Nile Delta. Disillusioned peasants abandoned their villages and took to the countryside, forming bands of outlaws. Greek military outposts and Egyptian temples were attacked. Even the rival kings of Macedon and the Seleucid Empire offered their assistance to Ptolemy to suppress the unrest, setting aside their rivalry. But their support proved ineffective. Before long, civil war engulfed Lower Egypt. The spirit of resistance spread southward. Inspired by the chaos in the north, the citizens of Thebes launched their own rebellion. Since the decline of the new kingdom, Upper Egypt had long harbored aspirations of independence. The Ptolemies' neglect of the southern regions, preferring to rule from distant Alexandria, only deepened local resentment. In an attempt to appease Theban sentiment, Ptolemy IV ordered construction of a grand temple to Horus in Geba, located in the far south. But this gesture came too late. A contemporary Egyptian text, the Demotic Chronicle, harshly criticized the Ptolemies for failing to uphold Mot, the principle of cosmic order and justice, and foretold the rise of a native king who would overthrow the foreign rulers. That prophecy soon materialized. In 206 BCE, a dynamic rebel leader emerged victorious in an early confrontation with government forces. Within months, he seized control of the sacred city of Thebes and was formally declared pharaoh, receiving the endorsement of the powerful Ammonius priesthood. Known as Horwenifer, or beloved of Ammoniusare, king of the gods, he assumed power in the autumn of 205 BC. From Abydos in the north to Inerti, Greek Papyrus, in the south, Upper Egypt was once more under native control. Land records were destroyed, oppressive tax policies were abolished, and Greek settlers were driven from their homes. Ptolemaic authority crumbled across the region. For a brief and electrifying moment, it seemed that Egypt might once again free itself from foreign rule, just as it had done at earlier pivotal moments in its long history. The Ptolemies had a different vision. By the end of 200 BCE, the newly crowned Ptolemy V launched a counteroffensive from Alexandria. Greek forces advanced southward from their strongholds in the Delta and the Fayum. By early 199 BCE, they had reclaimed the city of Ptolemy, and as the seasons shifted into autumn, they laid siege to the sacred site of Abydos. After capturing the religious center dedicated to Osiris-Swinifer from the rebel faction, the army pressed on to Thebes, scoring another decisive victory. The spirit of resistance quickly faded into hopelessness as the rebels lost both their capital and their leader. Horwenifer's death in mid-autumn 199 BCE could have marked the collapse of the Theban rebellion. Yet, a successor named Anquinifer swiftly stepped in, continuing the established calendar of reigns as if no interruption had occurred. Still, with the Ptolemaic forces now holding Thebes and another Greek garrison entrenched at Aswan, Anquinifer found himself facing severe constraints. In a daring move, he chose to strike northward, possibly taking the desert routes, and targeted the region of Saudi, located nearly 190 miles from Thebes. His campaign aimed to inflict as much destruction as possible to isolate the Greek forces stationed in Thebes, cut off their supply lines, and sever their communication with Alexandria. The strategy proved effective. Eventually, the Ptolemaic troops were compelled to abandon Thebes and withdraw south. The rebellion had regained momentum. Frustrated by the persistent defiance in Upper Egypt, Ptolemy V redirected his focus to the insurgents in the Delta. In 197 BCE, his army besieged the rebels' heavily fortified and well-supplied headquarters. Despite their determination, the rebels could not stand up to the overwhelming firepower and superior military organization of the Ptolemaic army. The stronghold was captured, and the leaders of the revolt were taken to Memphis, where they were publicly executed by impalement, a brutal act staged as part of the king's coronation celebrations. This symbolic event, which took place on March 26, 196 BCE, fused politics and religion in a distinctly Egyptian manner. It was formally commemorated in a royal proclamation carved in both the Egyptian and Greek languages, and in 3 writing systems: hieroglyphic, demotic, and Greek. This monumental text has endured through the ages, better known today as the Rosetta Stone. Emboldened by his decisive triumph in the Delta, Ptolemy V redirected his focus to Thebes. The Ptolemaic army first drove the rebel forces out of the Saudi region in a brutal clash that left the land devastated. By autumn of 191 BCE, Anquinifer abandoned Thebes and fled toward the Nubian frontier, his choices dwindling rapidly. Once Thebes was retaken, the authorities organized a public auction of lands seized from the rebels. Restoring cultivation meant tax revenues could begin flowing once more. With Greek forces advancing on Aswan, well provisioned with grain from throughout Egypt, Anquinifer recognized the futility of continued resistance. Even with military aid from Nubia, the Egyptian insurgents suffered final defeat on August 27, 186 BCE. Anquinifer's son fell in battle, and the rebel leader himself was captured and imprisoned. His life was spared only by the intervention of a religious council convened in Alexandria shortly after. The priests advised Ptolemy V that executing Anquinifer would only make him a martyr. Instead, they urged the king to brand him a traitor to the gods but grant him clemency. Reluctantly, Ptolemy agreed and issued a sweeping amnesty decree, calling on all fugitives to return to their villages and farmlands. As part of his strategy to win back native support, the king also resumed construction on temple projects, notably at Jebah, which had been halted when the uprising began in 206 BCE. Yet alongside these reconciliatory efforts, Ptolemy moved to enforce tighter military control over Upper Egypt. For the first time, loyal Greek troops were granted land in southern communities. The governor in Ptolemy was given full command over both civil and military affairs, and new army encampments were established near Thebes at Suminu and Inerti. The south would be far less forgiving for any future revolt. Ptolemy's final act of reprisal was reserved for the northern insurgents who had originally sparked the rebellion. In 185 BCE, under the guise of peace negotiation, he summoned them to the city of Sais, a long-standing symbol of resistance in Lower Egypt dating back to the time of Tefnakht. Too late, they realized they had walked into a trap. On the king's command, they were stripped naked, yoked like oxen to carts, and paraded through the streets before the horrified eyes of the local people, then tortured to death. Ptolemaic clemency had its boundaries. Meanwhile, strife within the royal family continued unabated. By the late 3rd century BCE, internal discord was growing more acute, further inflamed by constant uprisings. When Ptolemy V inherited the throne in 204 BCE at just 6 years old, his mother was assassinated by powerful officials at court. These same officials then fought among themselves for dominance, plunging the government into deeper disarray. As internal divisions worsened, the kingdom's foreign power crumbled. Egypt lost its overseas holdings in Syria, Anatolia, and Thrace. By the time Ptolemy V died in 180 BCE, the once powerful empire had been profoundly weakened. And as Hellenistic rule faltered across the eastern Mediterranean, a rising young power looked on, its ambitions fixed squarely on the region's unraveling future. The Latins were among several Italic tribes that traced their lineage back to early settlers who had migrated into the Italian peninsula during the time of the Sea Peoples. According to their own legend, the Latins founded a city on the banks of the Tiber River in 753 BCE. This settlement, Rome, steadily expanded its power and influence. By 338 BCE, it had brought the surrounding Latium region under control, and within the next 80 years, it had conquered the entirety of peninsular Italy, even displacing Greek colonists in the process. It's no surprise, then, that the Ptolemies were eager to establish cordial relations with such a rising power. So in 273 BCE, fresh from the success of his grand procession and more self-assured than ever, Ptolemy II initiated a formal diplomatic exchange with Rome. That treaty of friendship marked the beginning of a long, tangled, and ultimately destructive relationship. From the beginning, the Ptolemies viewed the Romans with a mix of aloof superiority and eager admiration, a familiar posture for established empires confronting ambitious newcomers. Hoping to gain favor, and despite an existing alliance with Carthage on the North African coast, Ptolemaic Egypt remained neutral during the First Punic War. Rome, in turn, rewarded this passive support by sending a delegation of thanks. The same strategic behavior defined Rome's interventions in the ongoing conflicts between the Ptolemies and their Macedonian and Seleucid adversaries. Posing as a loyal ally of Egypt, Rome used these rivalries to expand its own reach in international affairs. Amid such endless bickering among Hellenistic powers, Rome's rise as the dominant force in the Mediterranean was almost inevitable. Like his father before him, Ptolemy VI ascended the throne at just 6 years old. With his mother serving as regent, Egypt enjoyed a brief period of stability during the first 4 years of his reign. But after her death in 176 BCE, factional power struggles within the court came to the surface, leading to the establishment of a joint rule. From then on, Ptolemy VI, his sister, and his younger brother Ptolemy VIII ruled as co-monarchs, an arrangement doomed to fail. The Sixth Syrian War proved disastrous. Ptolemy VI, attempting to broker peace with the Seleucids, was deposed by the angry citizens of Alexandria. Seizing the opportunity, Seleucid king Antiochus claimed to act in support of Ptolemy VI, but in reality aimed to expand his own territory. He laid siege to Alexandria, though he eventually abandoned the campaign due to unrest at home. The situation reflected the familiar pattern of internal rivalry, territorial ambition, and native resistance that plagued many Hellenistic regimes. It was at this chaotic moment that the Romans stepped in to restore order. When Antiochus returned to threaten Alexandria again in 168 BCE, Rome intervened decisively. That summer, the Roman envoy Popilius confronted Antiochus at Eleusis, just outside Alexandria. With remarkable boldness, he demanded that Antiochus immediately halt all hostilities and withdraw entirely from Egypt and Cyprus. Intimidated, Antiochus submitted without protest. This encounter, later known as the Day of Eleusis, became legendary as the day Rome rescued Egypt, though it marked the beginning of Egypt's loss of independence. For the remaining 130 years of the Ptolemaic dynasty, it was Roman influence, not Greek power, that dictated the course of events in Egypt. As internal disputes between Ptolemy VI and his siblings sapped the strength of the state, Rome became more frequently involved, called upon to back one claimant or another. The result was an ever-tightening Roman grip on Egyptian politics. At the same time, rebel uprisings continued to erupt in Upper Egypt, exploiting the political vacuum at the center. In 165 BCE, Thebes rose in rebellion. The unrest spread to the Fayum, where rebels torched land records, farmers abandoned their homes, and fugitives took shelter in temples. In response, Ptolemy VI issued a decree mandating the leasing and cultivation of farmland, but the edict was both ineffective and deeply unpopular. Eventually, he was forced into exile. Unsurprisingly, he turned to Rome for refuge. Ptolemy VIII did not fare any better than his predecessors. Within a year of taking power, his brutal and oppressive rule sparked widespread call for the return of his brother. Desperate to hold onto authority, he turned to Rome for support. During his exile in Cyrenaica, and following a failed assassination attempt around 156 to 155 BCE, Ptolemy VIII drafted a will promising his kingdom to Rome should he die without a legitimate heir. This move had the desired effect of intimidating his rivals, but it further eroded Egypt's autonomy. It wasn't until the death of Ptolemy VI in 145 BCE that Ptolemy VIII was finally able to reclaim the throne. Upon his return to Alexandria, Ptolemy VIII married his sister and allegedly ordered the murder of her son from her previous marriage during the wedding festivities. The act was in line with his notoriously cruel and ruthless character. He carried out severe punishments against Jewish military commanders who had resisted his authority and expelled many prominent Greek intellectuals from the city. To counterbalance the hostility of the immigrant elites, he deliberately sought favor with the native Egyptians, supporting their temples and issuing general pardons. Although transparently opportunistic, this strategy proved effective. Accustomed to harsh rulers, the local population largely ignored his atrocities and stood by him. The royal family's internal dynamics, never simple, grew increasingly chaotic. Ptolemy took the extraordinary step of marrying the younger daughter of his wife in 141 BCE and made her queen. This led to fierce rivalry between mother and daughter. As tensions escalated into civil war in 132 BCE, Ptolemy fled with his younger wife to Cyprus, while his estranged queen was declared sole ruler in Alexandria. Concerned that their son might be declared king in his absence, Ptolemy had the child abducted, brought to Cyprus, and murdered in front of him. He then had the boy's body dismembered and sent the remains back to the queen to arrive just before her birthday. Displaying political shrewdness despite personal tragedy, she exhibited the mutilated corpse publicly in Alexandria to stir outrage against her former husband. Yet the native population remained loyal to Ptolemy. His cold calculation had once again paid off. With strong backing from the Egyptians, Ptolemy I regained control of Egypt. He rewarded their loyalty by promoting Egyptians to high-ranking positions, something that had not been done in 2 centuries. Officials like the royal scribe Winifred echoed the grandiose self-praise of Egypt's ancient elite. "I was honored by my father, praised by my mother, generous to my brothers, beloved in my town, gracious in my province, admired by all." But along with the flattery came indulgent excess that marked the decline of traditional values. "I loved drinking, presided over feasts, surrounded by singers and beautiful maidens with braided hair and full figures who danced to delight my heart." This decadence reflected the broader decay of Egyptian society. The population was mirroring the behavior of its leaders. After reclaiming Alexandria, Ptolemy made a dramatic show of vengeance by surrounding and burning the city's gymnasium, killing everyone inside. This kind of senseless brutality, coupled with rampant corruption, only accelerated Egypt's downward spiral. Ptolemy I died in the summer of 116 BCE in Alexandria, leaving the throne to his young wife and whichever of her 2 sons she chose to succeed him. Meanwhile, far to the south at Philae, a group of Roman visitors carved their names into the temple of Isis, leaving behind the oldest known Latin inscriptions in Egypt. These 2 events captured the essence of Egypt's fading past and uncertain future. As the Ptolemaic dynasty descended into further strife, Rome's influence grew ever stronger. 20 years later, Cyrenaica officially became Roman territory, leaving Cyprus as Egypt's only overseas holding. History repeated itself when Ptolemy IX and X, 2 royal brothers, fought over the crown, while more unrest erupted in Upper Egypt. Another Ptolemaic ruler offered Rome his kingdom in exchange for military aid, and further violence broke out in the capital. Among all the traditions that had once defined Egyptian identity, only devotion to the old gods endured. For that reason alone, there was great rejoicing in 70 BCE when the monumental temple of Horus at Geba was finally completed. Though built in the Ptolemaic era, the temple was unmistakably pharaonic in spirit. With its massive stone pylons and pillared halls, it represented the fusion of Hellenistic form and Egyptian faith that the Greek rulers had long tried to achieve. The crowds who witnessed its dedication must have hoped they were seeing the birth of a renewed era of peace and prosperity. Those same hopes likely surrounded the birth of a new royal child a few months later. Of mixed heritage, the infant daughter of Ptolemy XII carried the future of a divided land on her shoulders. Her life would be dedicated to defending her country's independence. Her death would mark the end of pharaonic Egypt. Her name was Cleopatra,